And so shortly after taking office, I directed Leon Panetta, the director of the CIA, to make the killing or capture of bin Laden the top priority of our war against al-Qaeda, even as we continued our broader efforts to disrupt, dismantle, and defeat his network.
The idea, which is critical to the FBI's prosecution, that bin Laden ran a coherent organization with operatives and cells all around the world, of which you could be a member, is a myth. There is no al-Qaeda organization. There is no international network with a leader, with cadres who will unquestioningly obey orders, with tentacles that stretch out to sleeper cells in America, in Africa, in Europe. That idea of a coherent, structured terrorist network with an organized capability simply does not exist.
The American people did not choose this fight. It came to our shores and started with the senseless slaughter of our citizens. Tonight, I can report to the American people and to the world that the United States has conducted an operation that killed Osama bin Laden, the leader of al-Qaeda, and a terrorist who's responsible for the murder of thousands of innocent men, women, and children. Over the years, I've repeatedly made clear that we would take action within Pakistan if we knew where bin Laden was. That is what we've done.
Christopher Mayer, instead of being in a cave, he's in the middle of a military town, a garrison town. We know how these Pakistan army towns operate. The army, the military is everywhere, including the intelligence services. He's a 6'5" Arab in the middle of a Pakistan garrison town, living in an enormous compound with higher walls than the others around it. Are we seriously asked to believe the Pakistanis knew nothing?
The Pakistanis obviously knew something. We know that they have divided loyalties about the war against terrorism. It is true that they have suffered grievously from what is known as the Pakistani Taliban, who are a different group of Islamic fanatics who take it out on the Pakistani government. But they have a strategic ally, it has to be said, in the Afghan Taliban, because the game that the Pakistanis are playing are for influence in Afghanistan once NATO has left, because they're afraid that the great enemy, India, will then come to dominate Afghanistan. So I think it is quite likely, as the Afghan Taliban have a close alliance, or some of them do, with al-Qaeda, that this was done with the connivance of some elements in the ISI and in the Pakistani government.
But it's important to note that our counterterrorism cooperation with Pakistan helped lead us to bin Laden and the compound where he was hiding.
It's possible, and we can only speculate at this stage, John Reed, but it is possible, given where he was found, given that we know the Americans did not tell the Pakistanis they were going in, and it's pretty certain that there was no Pakistani forces involved in this, that it is possible that Osama bin Laden was actually under the protection of elements of the ISI, of the Pakistani intelligence service.
Well, I think there's two things we should avoid. One is jumping to conclusions, and the other one is shirking the hard questions. And you've identified one of the hard questions, precisely because the Pakistanis military would themselves be under a huge threat. It seems to me inconceivable that the area around the major garrison would not have been under, complete surveillance, even, forget Osama bin Laden, even to protect himself. So the question has to be asked, if that is true, how come there appears to be for some time the most wanted man in the world hiding within half a mile of this garrison for a prolonged period of time, receiving messages, presumably controlling strategy and so on? And I think that question has to be asked.
I want to turn now to CBS News Chief Foreign Affairs Correspondent Lara Logan, who has been following this very closely. Lara, there's a lot of talk about what Pakistan either did or did not know, and some concern that it seems that the Pakistani government may not have known that Osama bin Laden was hiding there. Is that really possible? They had no idea that he was in fact in this compound?
You know, no one that I've spoken to believes that, Erica, from counterterrorism officials to military commanders, generals, to special operations command, to operators, people who know this region. It's just inconceivable that Osama bin Laden could have been hiding out in this city, which is, I mean, so it is absolutely crawling with either retired military officials or military cadets or active military personnel. And in that very neighborhood. And, you know, David Martin touched on this. This compound was 8 times larger than any other building in the area. There is just, I mean, it's improbable to think that people living in that city, let alone members of the Pakistani military establishment, had no idea, never asked a question about it. If it came to the attention of U.S. intelligence, it certainly would have come to the attention of Pakistani intelligence and their intelligence services and their military brass. And, you know, most of the officials that I speak to now really have this feeling that Pakistan has been laughing at the U.S., laughing in the faces of the Americans, because they've known all along that Osama bin Laden is there. I mean, they've even stood up and said at times that, you know, Osama bin Laden is not in Pakistan. Well, not only is he in Pakistan, but he now turns out to be right amongst the military establishment itself.
Well, of course, the world's intelligence services may have their reasons for not disclosing this. I believe that officials within the ISI, the Pakistan's intelligence service, are providing active support, and that is officially sanctioned policy.
Yeah, but it's important to note that our counterterrorism cooperation with Pakistan helped lead us to bin Laden and the compound where he was hiding.
They used hundreds of different payphones and cell phones, often with prepaid calling cards that are extremely difficult to trace. And they made sure that all the money sent to them to fund their attacks was wired in small amounts to avoid detection.
Small amounts? Lieutenant General Mahmoud Ahmed, the director of the Pakistani Inter-Services Intelligence Agency, the ISI, was reported to have wired $100,000 to Muhammad Atta in August 2001. This transfer was facilitated by Saeed Sheikh, the man who allegedly kidnapped and murdered Wall Street Journal reporter Daniel Pearl, who is investigating the ties between the ISI and Islamic militants.
And the Pakistanis, of course, if you know your history, have only been a couple of degrees of separation away from the so-called Al-Qaeda hijackers.
The ISI has had a long-standing relationship with the Central Intelligence Agency, dating back to the 1980s with the establishment of the Mujahideen in Afghanistan, which would evolve into Al-Qaeda.
I focus in on the wire transfer that General Mahmoud Ahmed wired to Muhammad Atta right before 9/11. That's pretty crucial because General Mahmoud Ahmed was actually meeting with key Washington, D.C. insiders, Senator Bob Graham, Porter Goss, the future director of CIA, on the morning of 9/11. And he has a relationship not only with the CIA, but with Dick Armitage at State Department, Mark Grossman at State Department.
The meeting begins at 8 a.m. over breakfast at the Capitol building and lasts through Flight 175's impact with the South Tower. During his visit, which began on September 4th, Ahmed would also meet with the present CIA director, George Tenet. A month later, after reports of the transfer between himself and Atta, Mahmoud Ahmed retires from the ISI.
And we've had a number of Pakistani leaders, including Mr. Musharraf, recently deposed, saying that he was dead, or denying that he was in the country at all. Both these answers now look like smokescreens.
Then, last August, after years of painstaking work by our intelligence community, I was briefed on a possible lead to bin Laden. It was far from certain, and it took many months to run this thread to ground. I met repeatedly with my national security team as we developed more information about the possibility that we had located bin Laden hiding within a compound deep inside Pakistan. And finally, last week, I determined that we had enough intelligence to take action and authorized an operation to get Osama bin Laden and bring him to justice. But it's important to note that our counterterrorism cooperation with Pakistan helped lead us to bin Laden and the compound where he was hiding.
Lieutenant General Mahmoud Ahmed, the director of the Pakistani Inter-Services Intelligence Agency, the ISI, was reported to have wired $100,000 to Muhammad Atta in August 2001.
And he has a relationship not only with the CIA, but with Dick Armitage at State Department, Mark Grossman at State Department.
The meeting begins at 8 a.m. over breakfast at the Capitol building and lasts through Flight 175's impact with the South Tower. During his visit, which began on September 4th, Ahmed would also meet with the present CIA director, George Tenet.
For over 2 decades, bin Laden has been al-Qaeda's leader and symbol, and has continued to plot attacks against our country and our friends and allies.
The ISI has had a long-standing relationship with the Central Intelligence Agency, dating back to the 1980s with the establishment of the Mujahideen in Afghanistan, which would evolve into al-Qaeda.
But it's important to note that our counterterrorism cooperation with Pakistan helped lead us to bin Laden and the compound where he was hiding. The death of bin Laden marks the most significant achievement to date in our nation's effort to defeat al-Qaeda. Yet his death does not mark the end of our effort. There is no doubt that al-Qaeda will continue to pursue attacks against us. We must, and we will, remain vigilant at home and abroad.
What I'm finding is the video documentation that NATO rebels are actually the same al-Qaeda fighters that we've been dealing with in Iraq and Afghanistan, who've now come home to Libya.
10 years later, we have made important strides. Our government is better organized. Our defenses are safer than on 9/11. But we still face real threats, as we see today, and there is more work to be done.
The leader of the terrorist group, Jundullah, says the United States offered him broad support, including a military base in Afghanistan, to carry out attacks against Iran.
As thoughts turn to the traumatic events of a decade ago, Clinton warned it's impossible to foil every plot and that al-Qaeda was still able to attack. She said efforts to stop this would be relentless.
We have also learned that to truly defeat a terror network, we need to attack its finances, recruitment, and safe havens.
اینها رابطه کرده بودن که ما می‌خوایم با شما ملاقات بکنیم که ما گفته بودیم کجا، اینا گفتن در دبی ما میایم ملاقات میکنیم. شما با ما همکاری بکنید، ما هرچی مشکلات شما باشه این افراد از زندان آزاد میکنیم، به شما امکانات مالی در اختیارتون میذاریم و امکانات نظامی، اسلحه، مهمات ما برای شما تهیه میکنیم و در اختیارتون میذاریم و پایگاهی هم به شما میدیم در هر جای افغانستان که شما بخواید در مرزهای ایران. این حرفی که اونا آمریکایی‌ها گفته بودن در ملاقات دبی و ما الان موضوع ما موضوع ایرانه. الان نه موضوع القاعده هست و نه موضوع طالبان. ولی این که ما بگیم الان ما برنامه نظامی داریم، نه.
We need to take on its ideology, counter its propaganda, and diminish its appeal. so that every community recognizes the threat that extremists pose to them, and they then deny them protection and support. And we need effective international partners in government and civil society who can extend this effort to all the places where terrorists operate.
Shortly after Sunday's anniversary, the US will set up a global counter-terrorism forum. The aim is to gather officials to identify threats, devise solutions and share expertise, and to ensure that this never happens again.